Welcome back to Orange Peel. I'm your host, Nikki, and today I've got Forrest HODL on the show. Forrest runs the Bitcoin Not Crypto series, and he just dropped a massive Bitcoin pump coming video breaking down the Bernstein 150K 2026 price target and why this has been the weakest bear market ever. Plus, AI plus Bitcoin will create an abundant world. Now, these videos, if you're familiar with the work that we do on Orange Peel, are perfectly aligned with the thesis. So without further ado, welcome, Forrest, to the show. How are you going today?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk with you. I'm doing well. Yeah, I mean, we live in an interesting time here. We're always dictated a lot by what time frame in history we're born into. And you talk a lot to Gen Z and stuff with that type of generation with your podcast. So it's really interesting to take a look at where we're at today and what the future will look like. And I think AI and Bitcoin, as you alluded to, are two of the most impactful, disruptive things that we're definitely seeing right now. But looking back at this or looking back into history, potentially like the most disruptive technologies we've ever seen. It's hard to compare them or contemplate on what else could be as disruptive as these two technologies are, which I imagine we'll get into more deeply throughout this conversation.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of comparison between AI currently and then maybe the TCP/IP protocol back in the 1960s or even just the internet in the 1990s. But I really do think that the displacement that we're going to see with AI is miles ahead of what we saw with the internet. But obviously I didn't see what happened in Y2K with the internet, so I wouldn't be too sure about that. But to kick things off, let's start at the surface level and then go deeper into kind of the foundations that you stand for on your channel. You
Mhm.
recently posted a video about how Bitcoin is a decades-long kind of multi-generational asset, and you talked about how AI deflation makes scarcity even more important in a world full of abundance. So, how exactly does that play out now for someone in their 20s who might be using AI tools to build an online business and stack sats from the revenue that they make?
Well, I mean, if that's the case for that person, they're doing well. They're going to do great because it really is that simple as a thesis. Is how do I become more able to create value that is valued by the market, right? That's the sort of earning side, and how do I save that value in something that's going to increase in purchasing power over time, which is the Bitcoin side. Um, so the way I look at it, as far as AI goes, and I'm no by no means like an AI expert or anything. I dabble. I run a local LLM. I use AI all the time, but the way I kind of see it, and I see it through a Bitcoin lens, is that's my main focus and that's my main education. Uh, what I have a main education in is Bitcoin. So I see AI as creating rapid abundance, and it's not necessarily going to be constant abundance that improves your life, but it's sort of like um, how everything digital is easier to create. So if you had to build a calculator in the past, pre cell phone, you had to go and source the parts. You had to build a calculator. You had to get the buttons, the circuit board, the screen, everything to create this calculator. Then somebody coded a calculator, and because of the infrastructure of a phone, you can just download a calculator. Or, I mean, they're already on a phone, right? So it because it went digital, it became abundant and easy to copy, and there was no cost of just adding that tool into what you already own. So AI is similar in that way, where you can look at it. I mean, generative AI is a really clear example. So um, if it's really easy to create imagery, photos, graphic designs, then the relative scarcity of being able to be a design like a graphic designer and have demand, because there's sort of like a every market is supply and demand. So if somebody had the demand of wanting to create a logo, they would have to go to the relatively scarce pool of graphic designers and say, "Hey, can you design me this?" Now they can just go to AI and just generate a slew of images and pick the one that exactly or is roughly what they want. So it makes abundance of anything that uh, it makes abundance of many different things, and that's one specific little thing that I poked on. So anything generative, it can be in that realm too. So music, I mean, there's professional music that uses some semblance of AI within it already. There's tons of music that's fully AI generated, and none of it's very good. But that's my subjective opinion on that. But movies, videos, it's all this. It's the same, right? And these are tools that are getting better and better, and it's harder and harder to separate what was not created by AI and created by AI. So it's creating literal abundance, not in a way of everybody's life getting better necessarily, but abundance in things that we used to do that were that required some proof of work as an individual, now requires less work to create because of the tool of AI. So um and I imagine that's going to, and already has, moved over to things that do meaningfully impact us, right? What can AI do to improve, logistics of farming and shipping, and then therefore providing better food or more food around the world, right? There's sort of like it's difficult to almost limit the possibilities of a technology like this. So the previous examples I made were trying to be limited in the reality of today and what abundance can be created from AI, which is in these realms where, unfortunately, like creatives used to be in, or still are to some degree. Um, and I think all of that's going to spread out, and it will eventually lead to us having more ability to acquire the things we need as humans and the things we want as humans. So that's sort of the promise of technology in general, is abundance now, and better life because of the technology. Now where that can be disrupted is we live in a monetary system that is extractive. So any sort of abundance that comes in from technology, that's just opportunity for the system that is systemically broken, in my belief, to take more. So it's just more opportunity to kind of steal. So that's what we have to like kind of fight against, in my opinion. And AI isn't going to fix that. So like AI can be as creative and as abundant as possible, but if we allow power structures to just take that from everybody to some degree, then we won't necessarily see the benefit of it, right? Like you can be so much more productive, but maybe that productivity is just demanded from you because of AI, and you actually don't have a better life anymore because of this abundance that we've seen. So the counter to that is the fix to the current financial system, which is, in my estimation, the source of theft of the essentially what is stealing from everybody's life. It's hard for me to really put in words how terrible it is, but the way I look at it is the fiat system steals money from people, and money is a representation of our time and energy. And the time we have on this earth is arguably the only thing we have. So it's stealing. The time we have on the earth is our life energy. It's our life force. It is our existence. And if somebody's stealing that from you, they're stealing your life. It's like a vampire, like sucking the energy, the blood out of you, right? And that's what the fiat system is doing. And that's why I know we started talking about AI and stuff, but again, Bitcoin is my main focus because Bitcoin is the thing that solves this. And without this being solved, it doesn't matter about any other technology. If we allow our life force to be stolen, if we have a system that systematically does that and steals from everybody, that's again the biggest problem we have in the world, and that's what Bitcoin solves.
Talking more about Bitcoin and the fiat system that we lived in, you've emphasized lowering your time preference quite a bit as kind of this ultimate antidote. What I want to ask you is what would a shift in your time preference look like day to day for someone in their early 20s?
Mm. Yeah, it's actually kind of more of a subtle thing than I think most people
Mhm.
recognize. So, um, time preference is sort of the idea of being able to look into the future and have some goals set, some expectation, and really, if you boil all of it down, it's sort of hope. It's hope for the future. If you have a really short time preference, it's because you're trying to satisfy your present desires or your present needs. So, if we look at animals, animals have a pretty short time preference, right? There might be cases, like birds build a nest to prepare for the winter and things like that. That's more of like a long term time preference activity for an animal. A dog might bite the hand that feeds it because it just really wants the food and doesn't think the consequence of biting the hand and then not getting food later on, right? So it's sort of self sabotaging its future because of that. So this is kind of a lower time preference activity found in nature. Humans are much the same, right? Like we all like you can sort of think of like a hedonistic lifestyle of thinking like I just want pleasure now. I want to as soon as I get money, I'm going to go spend it. I'm going to go party. I'm not going to care about like, I mean, what 20-year-old has like a retirement account, right? Like it's sort of just like almost like a joke, right? Like you just, oh, whatever. Like I'm 30. So the saying when I was a kid was YOLO, right? That's not the saying anymore, but it's you only live once, right? And that's sort of like the idea of just going for it and just not caring. So uh, the long time preference is something that you probably will begin to adopt with Bitcoin because Bitcoin does not satisfy the short time preference. In fact, it's probably its biggest deterrent from the vast majority of people adopting it. A lot of people with serious capital, they'll look at Bitcoin and they'll say, that's too volatile for me. What they're saying is that in the short term, I can't predict what this thing is worth, and then that puts that part of my portfolio in jeopardy of short term volatility risk. If I need to sell this asset tomorrow, I don't know if it's going to be worth more. In fact, it's likely it could be worth less, right? There's sort of like a 50-50 chance or whatever it is. Actually, there's more days that Bitcoin are down on average over the year than up, but the times they go up, they go way up. So in that way, if you hold an asset like this and you have a short time preference, you're going to get wrecked. So by becoming a Bitcoiner and caring about those things that I mentioned earlier about how this is a real revolutionary asset that can destroy the financial system as we know it today and therefore benefit all of humanity. If you start caring about those kind of things or different aspects, there's lots of different reasons to care about Bitcoin. But once you start doing that and you adopt Bitcoin into your life, you start to be forced to have a long term time preference because you start saying, well, this isn't going to replace fiat. This isn't going to be the reserve currency. This isn't going to increase my purchasing power in a day, a month, even a year. Um, and you start looking into history of Bitcoin's price and you say, okay, well, if I hold it for 4 years, it's really highly likely that it's going to be worth more if we back test it than it is today. So I got to have a 4 year time horizon for this asset, bare minimum. And then the longer you look at that, you say, okay, well, if I hold it for 10, this thing could be worth this much. It's all sort of like monetary and like price a lot of times when people get into Bitcoin. But because it forces you to hold this asset for a long period of time, that starts to lower your time preference with the investment that you've made in Bitcoin. And I don't even consider Bitcoin an investment, but I'm kind of talking about it in a way that other people might understand. Um, and then really what that does is it starts to allow you to plan for the future because you start to think, okay, if this does what we think it does, if it has a compound annual growth rate of 30%, if it starts to demonetize real estate and stocks and bonds and other assets around the world, if it starts to become more adopted as a store of value, medium of exchange, that will allow me to own a home in a country that has a housing crisis where I never thought I'd be able to do that before. And now I have a reason to save some money on Friday instead of going out binge drinking. I can throw a little bit of money into some sats. And in 10 years, that could be that could start to go towards education fund for my child. And uh, just for like a personal antidote, like a personal story, um, Bitcoin literally led me to feel confident enough to have a child. Actually, so my wife and I kind of always wanted to have a kid, didn't really know how it was going to work, got into
Mhm.
Bitcoin, started realizing, oh, I can save this for the long term, giving me that long term time horizon, which actually instills hope. And that's why I started explaining this as is it being sort of a subtle and nuanced thing. Is it isn't necessary, like it actually doesn't really, I mean, it matters, but in some ways, it doesn't matter what Bitcoin ends up becoming because the entire time you have hope, and hope is actually a really powerful feeling to instill a daily life that is better than the life you used to live without hope. So prior to finding Bitcoin, living more in the sort of day to day, hedonistic type way of just fulfilling pleasures and needs is actually a very nihilistic way to live. You end up kind of it's the nihilism is sort of the lack of hope for the future. You start looking at like the world. Oh, there's just endless wars. It doesn't matter if I choose left or right for politicians. There's sort of a mono party behind that that's controlling everything. Like you start to get kind of down on the world. You don't. There's a lot of things in the world that are pretty depressing when you look at them. So that's where I was before Bitcoin was fairly nihilistic. I didn't really think a lot of things mattered. Finding Bitcoin hired my time preference, gave me hope for the future, and gave me the confidence to have a family.
How did you discover Bitcoin? And when you did, was shifting your time preference a big hurdle that you had to pass?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. So I found Bitcoin. I was broke for a lot of my life. I was sort of a struggling small business owner, very nomadic, traveling around a lot, um, and just focusing on building this business that the entire intention of it. So I was previously a filmmaker. The entire intention of it was to do something I actually enjoyed doing with my job to make money, as opposed to just doing something I felt like I had to go and work a 9 to 5. That's great, but oftentimes it's a tough way to make it go. So it was for me, um, and eventually I did come into some money, and then when I came into that money a little bit, I started thinking, I was always interested in like investing as a kid, and I read like Rich Dad Poor Dad, and like, oh, you got to own
Mhm.
real estate and get your assets to work for you, and there's tax advantage to investing and building a business as opposed to being an employee. So these ideas were sort of like ingrained to me from a young age. So I would invest it into like S&P 500, gold, few different little assets here and there, some tech plays, Tesla, stuff like that. Um, and this was I got into Bitcoin in like 2017, but it was only just for like trading purposes because some friends of mine introduced me to it. And then I sold it all to just continue building that business I mentioned. And then in 2021, 2022, I got back interested in it because there was so much like interesting fraud stuff going on with like FTX
Mhm.
and Terra Luna. And it was just like an intriguing story that was like in the news. Um, and at that same time was when I came into a little bit of money. So I looked into researching stocks and things and looking up, okay, I go to the store and beef has gone up every single week, right? So I understand the idea of like inflation. I didn't know what the cause of inflation was, but I realized housing prices were going up, food was going up, everything was going up. And we called that inflation. So I looked up, I literally remember doing this. I Googled what assets do well in an inflationary environment. And it listed like assets that appreciate at the same levels of inflation are like housing, scarce assets like gold, Bitcoin. And I was like, oh yeah, Bitcoin. I owned some of that like 5 years ago. And then I just kept looking into it. I listened to the Sailor series, and the biggest hurdle to me, you mentioned the time preference again, it wasn't that because I knew I was young. I knew I could handle volatility. The biggest hindrance to me was just understanding what the hell it was. Like Bitcoin is confusing, right? Like you
Yeah.
start to think, okay, it's digital gold, but that really only explains kind of like the 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 idea of how it's issued through proof of work and through the supply issuance of it. Okay, its max supply is 21 million. But what does that mean? Why does that matter? Um, Bitcoin is money, but nobody uses it as I can't go to the store and pay for it. So how is it money? What is money? Right? What are the characteristics of sound money? How does Bitcoin score on these kind of things? To me, it was just like understanding all the aspects of what Bitcoin was the hurdle. And I think that um I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't think anybody just
Yeah.
like hears Bitcoin and completely understands it. And I think if they do, like I know in 2017, I remember explaining to one of my family members, oh, Bitcoin is like digital gold and there's these ICOs and there's other, ETH and these other coins and blah, blah, blah. It was totally Dunning-Kruger effect. Like I was at the peak of Mount Stupid. I was very confident about my knowledge and my knowledge was very little. So, you kind of have to go through that. You have to you get the base understanding of these initial things, but it's very hard to play out and understand like the game theory of what it means to have 21 million Bitcoin and that's it. To have programmed issuance, for it to be code, to have a decentralized network. What if, all Bitcoin is a decentralized financial ledger network. And if you understood each one of those words and combine them all, you would have a pretty good understanding of Bitcoin. But most people would just hear that and have some made up version analogized to something else that they have an understanding of. And it's not that because Bitcoin is so novel. You need to understand what each one of those things is. And there's these tiny little tethers back to other things um, like I grew up like torrenting things. So like, yeah, Bitcoin sort of has like the way you download it is similar to like a torrent network system. But it's not just that, right? It's so many other things. So to me, it took years and years of figuring out, learning every little piece of it. And I'm a very obsessive person. I'm a very like, once I lock into something, I just put all my attention on it. So that's what I did for years and years before ever talking about Bitcoin publicly. Or now I'm even sharing knowledge and teaching people one on one and doing all sorts of stuff around Bitcoin because I've just become super obsessed with it.
Mhm. I think there's a reason that people say if you don't understand Bitcoin, it's just because you haven't studied it enough. And I think that's probably where part of that obsessiveness even comes from. I mean, I totally get it. But I guess the best follow up I have here is what is Bitcoin and what does it mean to you?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you want, I can go into the the decentralized financial network or ledger network. I don't know how technical you want me to get
I
into or
guess
not, but
in the context of being young and wanting to make some money,
Mhm.
wanting to secure yourself for buying a house, for having a family, for getting married, having a good retirement. W- What role can Bitcoin play to
Mm,
help you get there faster?
yeah. Well, and again, this is kind of where it ties into AI a little bit, but as things become easier to acquire, um, when something is purposely scarce and still desirable, then the only thing that can move within those metrics, when something is scarce, that's supply, right? That's a dictation of supply. When something's desirable, that's demand. And simple economics teaches us those are the two metrics, supply and demand, and they dictate price. So when there's lots of supply and very little demand, the suppliers are willing to sell it for really cheap just to get rid of it. Um, And when there's lots of demand for something but very little supply, the suppliers now have the power and they jack up the price because people are willing to pay for it until it reaches an equilibrium of trade. So Bitcoin has all these self restrictions within it. Bitcoin is a set of rules. It's a monetary protocol with a very strict set of rules. And those rules are intentional. The max supply is one that I've already mentioned. The supply issuance of 3.125 Bitcoin per 10 minutes block is intentional. And actually, that reduces every roughly 4 years. And all of those things are predictable and verifiable by running a Bitcoin node software. So you can go into this money protocol, this alternate money protocol that exists outside of the fiat system that we're born into. You can see all of the rule set of it. And you can understand that if it stays as desirable as it is, or if it increases in desirability, that supply is not going to meet it. So with any other asset in the world, you let's take oil, for instance. All of a sudden, if there's lots of demand for oil, well, that incentivizes more oil producers to create more oil, to extract more oil out of the ground, and to produce that, and to supply that to the market. And those things will equal out at some point. There might be a boom in price or a depression in price, but eventually it'll meet an equilibrium where supply meets demand. That's not the case with something like Bitcoin, where um, the supply cannot change. Right, that's the major difference. And people will often compare Bitcoin and gold, right? And the reason I'm explaining all of this, I just want to say, is because if you're looking to improve your life into the future, if you're looking for something to save in, you need to look at aspects like this. Because what can you save in that's going to be more valuable in the future, more desirable, and more scarce into the future? And if you can look into history. Another couple examples of commodities are silver and gold. You can actually look into history, and there were countries that went onto a silver standard, and there's countries that went onto a gold standard at the same time. And gold is more scarce and harder to add supply to the market. So it has it. If just looking at it simplistically, it has a lower issuance and a more fixed max supply, but it's not fixed. But silver is easier to extract and more abundant. So what happened was countries that were on the gold standard, they sold their silver to the countries that were on the silver standard. And in exchange, they took gold, they took land, they took resources, companies, all sorts of assets out of that country and brought it back and increased the wealth of their own nation for something that they could produce more easily than if the other nation tried to extract goods and services out of that country using gold, because gold is more scarce and harder to acquire. So this basically led to countries and nations like England and France becoming really dominant, whereas India and China became less dominant in the past because of adopting a sounder money standard. So as an individual, if you think about it in that same way, okay, what can I save in to be able to purchase more in the future? Is it going to be stocks? Well, stocks can be issued by a company, right? Like they're not really that scarce. It's sort of an artificial scarcity, and that you don't really know the supply of. And it's all predicated on what the market values that company based on. Its potential future earnings, its current balance sheet, its CEO, all sorts of its competitive moat, its product now, what it'll do in the future, right? These are really, really hard things to calculate. And typically, a lot of what they do, a lot of what companies will do is just appreciate at the level of easy money. And so if we go all the way down, right, the last thing you want to own to improve your wealth in the future is dollars, is fiat currency. Because fiat currency, as I explained with Bitcoin, has such a fixed issuance. You can go and audit exactly how much Bitcoin is released. We have no idea how much dollars are being released every day. We can only guess, right? And there's all these sort of offshore, like there's like the euro dollar system that is pretty shadowy. There's all these hard to calculate metrics like what the lending conditions are like for banks, because banks essentially one thing maybe viewers should know if they don't is when you go into a bank and you you get a mortgage, that bank is not transferring money they have in a vault somewhere to your account. They are just adding ones and zeros to your account. They're just adding the dollars that didn't exist. They now exist into your account, and you can now go buy a home with that. So that's money getting created sort of randomly and all over the place. And again, back to supply and demand, they're increasing the supply of dollars, and demand is going to fluctuate, but they're definitely increasing supply. So dollars are not what you want to save in, right? So then it just becomes about it should put you back into that position I was at when I kind of discovered Bitcoin and decided to save in it, was what do I save in when I know that dollars are not what to save in? Dollars are going to go down in value, and the reason is because they can just create more of them, and the reason they can create more of them is there's no cost of production. So a bank, as I said, can just add more zeros to your account and create more dollars for zero cost. Even paper dollars, like $100 bill costs 11 cents to produce. So they're worth 11 cents worth of purchasing power. It's all belief. It's all the idea of I can take this $100 bill, I can go to the store, and the cashier is willing to accept it for what they have deemed $100 of goods are. It's all belief. And that's what fiat it means. Fiat is by decree, or basically faith, right? Faith in something to exist. And I don't have faith in the fiat system. I don't believe that money should be free for some people and take their life force to gather for other people, because I know like dollars are not easy for me to acquire. Like I have to put in time and work to acquire dollars. So why can other people get them just by creating them for free? So it's a very, very unfair system. Bitcoin is not unfair, right? I mentioned there's 3.125 Bitcoin released every 10 minutes. Everyone has the opportunity to try to acquire that. It's through the mechanism of mining Bitcoin, right? Through the proof of work algorithm of mining Bitcoin using a computer, using electricity in that computer that costs money. And depending on what your rates are and how accessible you can get the, what it costs you to buy the Bitcoin miners, it's going to cost you somewhere close to what a Bitcoin costs. And some miners can do it more efficiently because they can, they have a wind farm or they have older machines that they got for cheap, but it's still costing them something, right? It's still costing them maybe 60 to 90% of what Bitcoin costs on the open market. And they're taking a risk, right? By mining Bitcoin, they're not guaranteed Bitcoin. They're just competing in a lottery. So they sort of, there's a little bit of a premium on Bitcoin on the market because you can buy it right away. You don't have to put it up for chance to acquire future Bitcoin by mining. So that creates a real cost of production, and that should probably factor into something that you value. If there's value in something, it probably costs something. There's very few things in the world that have value that don't cost anything. You can probably count them on your hand. Like air would be one. Water doesn't have very much cost of production, and it's because these things are abundant, right? But these things are actually like the most important thing for life. So a scarcity really matters. Is basically what I'm saying there. So Bitcoin could help that young person if they understood it in the deeper way, if they believed that it could be a part of the future. And to me, I believe that more and more people will wake up to the reality that their dollars are worth nothing. And then they start looking for options, and that leads them to stocks, but they're still dollar denominated. There's still jurisdictional risk. Leads them to gold, but gold has its issues. It's never going to be money. It became tokenized as paper gold, and then it became centralized and controlled. And it's not fully scarce. We actually don't know how much of it exists. We don't know how much gets created. We don't know how much already exists that's mined and stored. But if you're going down the route of understanding gold a little bit, that's going to take you to Bitcoin, and you're going to say, oh, this is gold, but perfected in a software form. and no one can mess with it. It's completely censorship resistant, and I can store it really safely, more safely than I can with gold. Actually, somebody could physically threaten you and take your gold. If you store, you can store Bitcoin in a way where somebody could physically threaten you and you have no ability to actually give them your Bitcoin. So it's gold reinvented, digitalized. It's money reinvented in a way that is not centrally controlled and fair. And that's what I'm betting on is more adoption, more people realizing those things, and therefore more demand. And we know there's not going to be, Bitcoin is one of the hardest things to acquire more of, right? There's no more Bitcoin after 21 million. So if there's more demand for it, only one thing can move, and that's price. And since fiat dollars are worth nothing, it's my belief that eventually there's going to be sort of an S curve adoption of Bitcoin, and you can see that throughout history. Fiat currencies collapse. Like the U.S. dollar is a bit of an anomaly for how long it's lasted. The Iranian real just collapsed, right, because of the citizens just not believing that it's worth anything anymore in a moment of chaos and turmoil. Um, that could happen anywhere, and it's happening very slowly and gradually. And it's basically the job of central bankers and financial planners in the organizations to make it happen slowly so they can extract as much life force out of you as possible, and that you don't wake up and decide to use a completely fair, neutral, alternative monetary network like Bitcoin.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit here and talk more about how Bitcoin actually works in terms of its energy use. Because a lot of the times when I try to get my friends interested in Bitcoin, some of the pushback that I hear is about how it uses a lot of energy and it's not exactly environmentally friendly. And you've done some videos on this topic as well. I would I would love to ask if you could walk us kind of through that moral argument and talk about maybe why proof of work makes Bitcoin some of the most honest money that we've ever had, even though it does use energy.
Yeah. So I grew up on the West Coast. My family is hippies. I grew up really caring about the environment. Um, it was important to me to understand this really deeply because I didn't really want to use something that I deemed wasteful, unnecessary, right? And there's many other cryptocurrencies that piggyback on Bitcoin and pretend to be the next thing or whatever. And famously, Ethereum is the second Bitcoin or the second crypto, and they moved from proof of work to proof of stake because of environmental sort of pushing, environmental advocates pushing them to do that. I think it's also
Mhm.
just to centralize control more and benefit the
Yeah.
pre-mine and everything. But um, so there's sort of that argument. That argument is completely valid and completely exists. And the reality of it is that Bitcoin does use energy, right? The Bitcoin network uses energy. And as you begin to go down this road, and stick with me if you're an environmentalist, you'll begin to see why Bitcoiners think that it should use more energy and that the energy that it uses is really great. And there's many reasons for that. So couple things that I'll say before I get into why it uses energy is that Bitcoin mining is around 57% renewable energy input. That's more than any other single industry in the world. If you took any other industry, they use more fossil fuels and non-renewable than that. It's also that trend that has led to 57% renewable is actually increasing more than any other industry in the world as well. And the reason for that is because it incentivizes the use of renewable energy. Because Bitcoin mining, as I kind of stated earlier, talking about like home mining or anybody being able to mine, if you have 15-cent electricity and a Bitcoin miner, you're better off not mining Bitcoin because it's going to cost more for you to mine a Bitcoin than it is for you to buy a Bitcoin at current prices. So the only way to mine Bitcoin is to get cheap electricity. That's what all these Bitcoin miners are seeking. And so they go out and they find a cheap electricity around the world. And if you look at energy production out there and the cost of energy production, solar is actually the cheapest electricity in the world. renewable energy in general actually has a lot of cheap electricity um, because the way the grid works, and this is getting complicated probably for people, but the grid that we're using right now to make this call and to record, and we all turn lights on and everything, it has around about an 8% overload on the grid, meaning they constantly supply electricity constantly. So electricity is always available and on demand. Whenever you switch the lights on, the electricity's there. They don't have to go and fire up another production of electricity anywhere. It's already exists on the grid. So the problem with renewables, actually, I'll just say the grid really likes stable energy. They love nuclear, they love natural gas plants because they can supply constant electricity for the demand that's there. And then they really like natural gas plants as well because they're easy to turn on and off. So if there is more demand, like say there's more demand at like 5 o'clock at a certain area, they'll turn the natural gas plants on ahead of time, make sure there's electricity for when everybody gets home and starts turning their washing machines on and cooking dinner. So the problem with renewable energy that we all love in the green world and everything is it produces energy whenever it wants, right? Based on nature. So it produces energy when the sun shines or when the wind blows, and that's not when the grid wants it. The grid actually hates this intermittent electricity producers that green energy is. So Bitcoin miners can step in, and during the day, like solar is actually like the exact opposite of what the grid wants. So the sun shines the most when there's the least demand of electricity on the grid. So there's a whole bunch of extra electricity that these solar farms will create. And the grid doesn't, it's again, supply and demand. So yeah, they may take some of it, but they already have electricity from a nuclear power plant over here or whatever. So they don't really want that electricity. So they're not willing to pay a lot for it. And Bitcoin miners can step in and say, well, you've created all this extra electricity the grid doesn't want. We will buy it because what we can do is we can put Bitcoin miners on site of your solar farm. And when there's excess electricity, we'll turn our machines off. And because there's no ramping on or ramping down of these Bitcoin miners, they can immediately shut the Bitcoin miners off when the grid wants to buy the electricity. And the grid is actually willing to pay more for the electricity at that moment. So Bitcoin miners will get really cheap electricity when that electricity would just be wasted otherwise. So that's happening in massive scale all around the world. And what that's doing, if you just think through second order, right? If you think through what happens if you're a solar farmer and you don't have any people buying your electricity, all of a sudden a buyer comes in and saying, hey, I want to buy your electricity. Well, that means more profits for you. Now you have a dedicated buyer that can scale up to whatever demand you give them. And now you can say, well, this is now a profitable business. I'm going to expand my solar farm. So this is actually an incentive for more renewable energy, which I think is underplayed and understood in the Bitcoin space. So Bitcoin mining does use a lot of electricity. The way it uses electricity is it's essentially computers guessing certain numbers to be able to solve a block and to include transactions, and they get the Bitcoin rewards for doing so. This is a highly computationally intense activity. So it takes specialized computers called application-specific integrated circuit computers. Those are called ASICs. And these computers do one thing only, and it's SHA-256, and it's trying to solve a Bitcoin block. And so there's a lot of electricity, and it's all input of electricity. Another thing too is electricity, like energy doesn't just disappear, right? We know this from the laws of thermodynamics. So electricity goes in, heat comes out. It's like a 1-to-1. So a lot of Bitcoin miners will just like push that waste heat out because they want to keep their miners cool, but they can actually capture that. So like right now I have a Bitcoin miner in my office. It's partially heating my office. I'm not super profitable here, but I have baseboard electric heat anyway. So it's the same thing, except I'm earning a little bit of Bitcoin. So it's sort of subsidizing my heating. And big Bitcoin miners can do that. There's lots of home miners of people being able to do that. And again, this is all to show that like the electricity usage is not, it's not just one and one. It's not just simple. all this electricity is being used on Bitcoin, so therefore it's bad for the environment. There's so much nuance within that. And the other thing too, I'll just say before I finish, I know I'm going off a lot here, but um, we put energy towards things we care about, right? It's a lot of energy to turn on a car and go drive down to the grocery store, but it's valuable to us because it saves time and it's easier, and we can bring back more groceries really easily, as opposed to if we walked and had to hike all the groceries back on foot. So we use electricity for things we find valuable. And the biggest criticism, most vocal criticism about the energy usage of Bitcoin is coming from people that don't value Bitcoin. So I really, really value Bitcoin because, again, I think that it's the most likely option to be able to have a monetary network outside of the fiat system that is incredibly destructive, that forces people to have a short-term time horizon, which actually incentivizes consumerism, and consumerism is also bad for the environment. And puts you in debt. It incentivizes debt as well because debt gets cheaper. It's just got this crazy knock-on effect that fiat has, and Bitcoin is the exact opposite of that. So the the thing about the energy usage of Bitcoin is it's a point of pride. You go onto a Bitcoin block explorer, you can see how much hash rate is going towards the Bitcoin network. And it is an estimate, but you can sort of calculate, okay, well, how many computers is that? How much electricity is that? Oh my God, it's 1% of all electricity usage. That's the same as the country of Argentina. And it's all for a financial ledger that I don't care about, right? It's all visible and noticeable and quantifiable, the electricity usage. The destruction, the environmental impact, the energy usage of the fiat system is way harder to calculate. So, but I would argue that it's significantly worse. It's so much worse. It's so much worse, and it has no incentive for unstable electricity generation like Bitcoin does. So, Bitcoin's building a better future in every possible way, and one of them is energy production. And there's another chart. Sorry, I keep going off here, but another chart that shows that life expectancy and also sort of like the how much like the value like that you have, like the joy you have, and the sort of quality of life is the term I'm looking for. Your quality of life in countries is directly proportionate to energy usage. So as we use more energy, our quality of life actually increases. So people that are talking about like we need to use less energy and stuff, I understand it in some way because certain energy usage can be deemed as bad, like pollutant and things like that. But it's actually we need to use way more energy, and energy is abundant. It's just harnessing the abundance of energy that we have. That's the challenge, and Bitcoin aids in that. So we'll see a much better world as we see more and more Bitcoin adoption.
I wonder if your stance on the energy usage of Bitcoin translates over to AI as well, because AI has massive environmental impacts with energy use and its water use. Would you say that the principle of using energy and water for AI is okay because it's something we value? Still applies, or is that a completely different ballgame?
I mean, something being okay or not is purely subjective. It's really just based on the individual's opinion. So I could say that it's okay or not. It doesn't really matter. But and I can share my opinion on that, but I will just say that it is different. Like the AI data centers, they cannot. It's called load shedding when they turn off or turn on. Bitcoin miners can do that with no consequence. If you have a data center and it's training a brand new frontier model, you cannot just shut that off because the grid starts to demand electricity. So you're not as much of a player. You're not a very nice player for the electricity grid compared to Bitcoin mining. So it might incentivize more energy production, but it's going to be like nuclear plants and stuff, like really stable, high value energy in a location based. They're not going to hook up to solar farms and stuff like that. It's just too unreliable for what they're doing. So it's fundamentally different in that way. But yeah, I mean, it is something that we're deeming to value. I mean, the market values it, right? Like Nvidia is a massive company, Google. XAI, OpenAI, all these companies are being valued. So if we subjectively as individuals don't value AI for some reason, that's not what the financial markets are saying. So they value it. And I guess it's again, yeah, it's just a subjective thing whether we think that it's good or not. But I'll leave that up to the individual to decide. For me, um, yeah, I mean it's situational, I guess, too, is like how they're generating the electricity and things. But it's a free market, if they're able to get an energy contract and build out a data center, and then they are able to provide value that makes economic sense, and their share price does well. I mean, they've done well in business. So that's that. There's regulatory capture and stuff. I don't love the entire system that we have today with I believe we live in a crony capitalism society with a socialist central bank, and the mix of those two things it's the worst of socialism, it's the worst of capitalism, and those two things have created a pretty unequal system. So yeah, there's a lot of unfairness even within that AI sphere. But nonetheless, I mean, you can just use AI anyway. Like I don't know, they're going to compete. They're either going to find market fit or not, and if they overextend themselves and people don't find what they've created with their models valuable, then they won't do it again. Essentially, they'll learn their lesson. That's how business works.
Yeah, I was just curious what your stance on that would be, because I think I tried to do my own research into the like energy use and the water use of AI, and from numbers it looks pretty bad. But I think it really does come down to how much value is being generated and the nuances of things. But I want to move on really quickly before we start to wrap things up to the importance of self education and practical sovereignty in Bitcoin. I think we live in a monetary system or a traditional system that teaches that money can be printed endlessly and that inflation and debt is normal. So, with that, I mean, why is, I guess, radical self education about hard money and Bitcoin's economics and its mechanics? And why is it the only reliable path forward for someone who's kind of in their early 20s right now? And then what would happen if they never really took this step towards learning about Bitcoin? So that's a really
What else?
long kind of packed question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what else are you going to do, right? Like the other option is just to be taken advantage of. Like if you don't educate yourself on um, sovereignty, on self sovereignty, and the ability to do things yourself, you are reliant on others. And that reliance on others, and I'm just saying this generally, but obviously this is about finance. If you're relying on the financial system, um, you're going to be subjected to their rules, and they're going to have power over you. And that's a really risky, precarious place to be when you don't have the ability to design your own financial destiny because you're reliant on where you live, what education you have, um, your history, your credit rating, these kind of things. Like you're very limited. You're limiting yourself. And there's an opportunity here for knowledge asymmetry, which means that there's a whole group out there that doesn't have knowledge. And if you acquire that knowledge, you will have a massive foot up on the average person. And that specifically applies to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the future monetary network that will be the backing of everything else. It is the TCP/IP, which is the foundation protocol level of the internet, to the financial system. So everything financial will be built on top of Bitcoin, because it is the only stable, secure, decentralized, cannot be messed with protocol ever to exist. It is really the only immutable history that we've ever had. All other history can be in question. All other history is subjected to the bias and understanding of individuals. And Bitcoin is not. Bitcoin is data on a ledger, that there's thousands of copies around the world of, and it's the longest running one, and it is the most secure and decentralized one. So you really um, you really limit yourself as an individual if you don't practice and don't begin to learn about ways of being self-sovereign. And one thing that I would just say to incentivize people is that Bitcoin is truly like there's a spectrum of ownership of anything in this world. And Bitcoin is on one end of that spectrum as being having the most ability to own something. Gold is close, but a house is not there. Shares in a stock in a company is not there either. A house is basically a long-term lease you have with the government, and the government can shift, the government can change, the government can deem you a threat based on something you said 10, 15 years ago. Who knows? And again, those are all things that are not within your control, right? And sovereignty is about figuring out what I can control and learning and taking the responsibility and the actions towards being able to control it. So self-sovereignty, and another way to put it is self-custody of Bitcoin, is not a simple thing. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of learning and it takes a lot of responsibility. And it's all worth doing all of that to have the ability to own something truly and to be able to control it and have a piece of that finite 21 million Bitcoin pie, because it's going to be forever scarce and forever desirable, as it is the base layer that the financial system will be built on. Right, the financial system will be rebuilt in a more fair way, and there'll be players, and there'll be people that can figure out ways to take advantage and control things, and of course, that's almost human nature to try to like benefit yourself, right? It's like a sort of a self-preservation move. That's why like these people are, I mean, there's narcissists and there's sociopaths out there, but there's also people that just like do things that don't benefit others because they're trying to benefit themselves. So that will still exist on a Bitcoin standard to some degree, but it'll be heavily limited by the base layer protocol being absolutely fair to fair and open to anyone that wants to be voluntarily involved in it. And those morals and ethics that are built into the rules of Bitcoin extend to everything else built onto it. And there will be limited ability for people to pull rug pulls. And fiat is a rug pull, right? And I'm using rug pull in a loose sense here, but you got to learn. You got to learn as an individual, basically, to sum it up, to take self custody, to take responsibility for your future, for yourself. You got to learn what are some better options that I can take so that I am not as reliant on somebody else that can take something from me. I don't have to give power over unnecessarily to people that might not have my best interests at heart. And that's what Bitcoin does, is it allows you to be a sovereign person in the realm of personal wealth and finance. And that's incredibly powerful.
How does that self-education required to learn Bitcoin directly translate to some of the hands-on skills that you teach over at Bitcoin Not Crypto? Things like you're running a node or using like tools like Cold Card or Ledger or Treasure for having encrypted notes and having true cold storage, or even just like setting up multi-sig.
Yeah, I mean that's what I do on my channel, right? That's the main purpose of my channel. I'll bring like educational pieces forward. I'll talk about sort of current events, Bitcoin treasury space, kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting topics people like to talk about. But the bread and butter and the main thing that I care about is self custody. And as I said, it's not an easy thing to do. So with that, there's lots of room to explain the nuances and the technical aspects and the hands-on experience. It takes learning about novel ideas, right? Like to take self custody of Bitcoin, you have to essentially create um, some degree of security that is similar to what a bank has for their cash reserves, right? You have to create using tools. You have to create a complex uh, cryptography, private public key pairing, and this is going to keep your Bitcoin safe. And this relates to uh, the derived addresses that you can receive Bitcoin on. And there's technical aspects of not wanting to reuse addresses and what kind of software Is Ledger Live okay? Well, it's closed source, meaning you're trusting all the devs behind it. So you want to do open source. So there's all this nuance within this, and there's all different levels of, um, and all that nuance is learning the degrees of self sovereignty around Bitcoin. So that's what I hope to teach. That's what I hope to show on my channel. And it's a big, long journey. And if you learn a couple things, if you take self custody with a cold card, it's not that hard to do, and you'll have done and know more, like 80% more than 99% of the people out there. So all the rest is sort of like more nuanced stuff and important, but just it's all steps, right? Like I'm not trying to say that Bitcoin is super complicated. It can be, but anything in the world that's complicated got there step by step. And then you just need to re-walk that same path to get there. So it is just putting one step ahead of the other. And um, my hope is to create tangible, usable knowledge pieces to make it so that people don't make the mistakes that are really easy to make, and that they get to the final destination of self custody and self sovereignty with Bitcoin easier without stumbling.
One last question to kind of tie it back to the thesis of this episode. On this channel, we talk all about building your wealth using AI and then protecting it with Bitcoin. So we kind of started off with that in the beginning, but all of this is grounded in kind of proof of work honesty, low time preference, and having an honest self discipline in terms of self education. So, what I want to ask today or ask now is what's one actionable step that someone listening to this can start today to work towards actually having a sovereign mindset and adopting that low time preference that we talked about that's required for Bitcoin?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, if you the way the what I recommend to everybody is to study Bitcoin, and the rest will come, right? Like uh, AI will enter your field of interest, and if you're on it, you can adopt it earlier. You can implement it to be more productive and therefore more valuable. That sort of will work itself out to some degree. Um, but you should study Bitcoin. And this isn't financial advice or anything, but for myself, it makes a lot more sense to have some skin in the game to begin to understand it. So if you're capable of it, buy a million Satoshis, have a million Satoshis without, even if this is the first time you've heard about Bitcoin, if you just buy a million Satoshis on some exchange somewhere, yeah, you're not in self custody. You're not understanding what this thing even is, but you now have skin in the game and a connection to something that you'll begin to care about. If it starts to go up, that's a thousand Satoshis is like $700, right? $700 worth of Bitcoin. If it goes up to $1,000, you'll wonder, oh, hey, what's going on here? Like, what's going on with Bitcoin? If it goes down, hey, what's going on in the world? Why is Bitcoin reacting to this? You're going to start caring about this thing more, and that's going to lead you into understanding that, I don't actually own Bitcoin because it's just on my Coinbase account, and I own a claim to Bitcoin. I own an IOU, so now I can move it over to uh, a wallet, a software wallet that I have on my phone. Oh, but this is software, and then it has the vulnerabilities of being connected to the internet. Oh, there's these things where you can generate a wallet completely offline. Okay, well, I'll do that. It's just going to lead you down those steps that I mentioned before. So that's the actionable step. Of course, I can't recommend people do that, but if I was to recommend somebody do that, yeah, I mean, that's what I would say. Study Bitcoin, but having skin in the game really does make it more useful, or more, makes you more invested, for lack of a better term, invested in what this is, and therefore you'll care more and become more educated on it just based on that.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have put it any better. I feel like I didn't start caring about Bitcoin until I actually had a little bit of Bitcoin to care about. Until then, it's kind of just this abstract concept of like, that's something that's going on in the world, but I don't really care about it. So taking it from abstract to something that's actually real, I think would be a great first step. Um, for my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today's episode. If this episode hit home for you, let me know in the comments. Let me know which part maybe resonated most with you. Was it the moral case for proof of work? Was it the lowing time preference? Or maybe it was the energy conversation, which I think personally was my favorite part of the episode. I really enjoyed learning from you, Forrest. This is something that I think is really hard to wrap your head around if you're not interested in how energy actually works. So this was a great explainer, and it really kind of put things into perspective. If you're still listening to this, like, subscribe, and yeah, Forrest, thank you so much for coming on. If there's anyone who wants to get in touch with you, maybe has a question or just wants to chat, is there somewhere that they can find you?
Yeah. Just want to say thanks for having me on. This was really fun. It's really good to just sort of get back to these sort of principal stances and sort of more basic understandings of what Bitcoin is. So I'm happy to have reiterated that here on this podcast. If anybody wants to reach out, my YouTube channel is just Forrest HODL, HODL, and you can also check out my website. I have a lot of resources on there. It's pathtobitcoin.xyz. I'm on X and Nostr as well. You guys can find me around just Forrest HODL everywhere.
Sweet. All of his links will be in the description, and I trust that you guys are either A, already familiar with who Forrest is, or B, will definitely go check out his channel after watching this episode. With that being said, stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay orange pilled. I'm your host, Nikki, and I'm going to see you guys on Sunday.